All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 362 for the week of November 3rd in the year of Thetis, of Andastre, and the maker of 2024. Right? So, yes, this is finally BioWare has released another game. And reviews are kind of mixed. Some are very high, some are kind of questioning. But we're going to talk about it here tonight because both GameLogIQ and myself have gone back into the world of Thetis and played a little bit of Dragon Age Veilguard. Then, as we always do here on Enough to Keep Going, we will spend some time with some headlines from the week and round out with any other games that we've been playing, things that have made it onto our playlist over the course of this week. So tonight it is just GameLogIQ and myself. Master is out. GameLogIQ, how are you tonight, sir?
Doing really good. Really good.
It's nice. Glad to hear it.
I do have one round of corrections and feedback from last week.
Oh, well, let's start with that because I wasn't here, so I don't get the blame.
So I think this was the result of me rushing. I had to fly out the next day, so I was like packing and other stuff. I also think I let Master gaslight me a little and start to question my own sanity. On the story about the Z690, I think, or Z890 motherboards for the Intel chipset that were experiencing instabilities with some of the new ultra core 200S chips, the Arrow Lake S chips. There was a moment in the conversation where I think I got bamboozled because apparently some of those chips have the old Intel XE integrated graphics with them, which were really used for laptop chipsets. But obviously I should have. So I started questioning whether or not the article headline said that they were talking about the desktop chips, but then they threw in that thing about some of them being integrated with the mobile GPU. For a brief part of the conversation, we started meandering and wondering whether or not they were really talking about the laptop version of Arrow Lake. But clearly, if they were talking about the Z890 motherboards, which is a desktop part, and since motherboards are sold for desktops, I should have connected the dots and gotten myself out of that trough and rabbit hole. But but I did want to put out that correction. That article was concerning the desktop Arrow Lake parts and the associated Z890 motherboards.
I appreciate the. I was not paying that close of attention during the news section. I did listen, but that you're right. That's a very good point about having a motherboard. Kind of starts to default it to a desktop. So, all right. Any other clarifications? Any other follow-ups that you want to take?
No, I'm certain I will screw up much more stuff because there's a ton of PC news tonight.
Not as much
console news. So.
A lot of kind of tech-related PC news more than, which again, it's kind of nice that we had a few news stories, but not as kind of, we are in the spot of the news cycle where things are coming out and not necessarily being surprise delayed. And we have not had at least that I haven't been paying attention to, another big kind of layoff round or so I'm sure we'll have more console news, but tonight we have plenty of PC game news and hardware to talk about as well. But before we get there, as alluded to at the top of the show, this is the Dragon Age Veilguard came out this week, and both GameLogIQ and myself have picked it up. I will start by saying I wasn't really this summer I was excited about it, and then my excitement kind of like, I'll pick it up on sale. And reading and watching the reviews for it kind of come in just kind of sucked me back into that world. And I think that was the big piece there, that my experience with Dragon Age, I played Origins shortly before Dragon Age 2 came out. Played Dragon Age 2 shortly after it came out. is in that kind of Mass Effect 2 to Mass Effect 3 kind of BioWare window for me, but I've stayed engaged in Dragon Age's lore through comics, and I learned this week that there is a Audible series or a podcast series of Dragon Age Veilguard that kind of introduces some of the characters, right? So it's like a radio drama, fully acted and voice cast, but I always enjoy the lore around Dragon Age, and so getting back into that world was a temptation for me, and I bit. So that's my lead up to it. I've played about 2 to 3 hours or so. How far into it are you, GameLogic?
About 3 to 4 hours. So I guess number one, I do want to say, if you're unaccustomed to watching the show and the first segment, like we actually typically don't issue the spoiler warning because we kind of feel like it should be assumed and known and understood. We talk amongst ourselves whether or not spoilers are okay. So I guess DBQ, but for the audience, like we're going to talk about the game. DBQ, what can you describe, like set piece wise, narrative wise, like what's the furthest extent you've gotten to in the game so far?
Sure. And I would say, I mean, if we're both only 3 to 4 hours in, we probably are not that. I got through the Veil Jumper area and kind of into that next section. So
yeah, I mean, the reason I say that so cautionary is because this is one of those games that, like, I don't know that there is anything such as like not a spoiler, right? Like, I mean, unless you purely talk about the mechanics, like to me, what I've been exposed to is every scene that I've come upon so far is a surprise. Like, I have yet to, like, it's a very brief moment in time that you're ever churning against the same kind of enemy. Like, so you're, at least in these first few hours, it's like like when you go to the next level or next chapter, you're going to be presented new enemies. So that's one of the
you're kind
reasons.
of moving around the world. You're moving from, you're getting faction to faction. You're kind of building up your team, and by doing that, you're engaging different enemy types, and whether they're creatures or factions as well.
So so just to tighten that up a little bit, so you've gotten to the Veil Jumper camp.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. I think you're right. Like, describing anything is potentially somewhat of a spoiler, but there's not, at least at this point, there's not the big strokes that haven't already been spoiled in the reviews, right? If you're the first, hour and a half is kind of it starts off with what they showed early in Summer Game Fest in terms of starting off in some action. Actually not exactly the same, because it's nice that, like, oh, I've seen that, but no, it's a little different, and the set pieces there. And that, if you've been following the game, that the focus has kind of shifted from simply being Dragon Age Dreadwolf to Veilguard. And so it starts to kind of shift that. To me, I was expecting the shift in narrative a little bit because of the change in the title that took some of the focus away from Solus and the Dreadwolf. But I really am enjoying the story of it. Like, and I think the characterizations are pretty good. At least early on, some of the reviews were not so favorable in terms of some of the characterizations and some of the dialogue. I don't, I will say from what I've seen, I'm enjoying the narrative. I'm also enjoying the combat though as well. So I guess let's start with the Dragon Age question of, like, what class and race did you kind of select?
So I am a elf. I am now a level 6 mage is kind of the branch that I went down.
Nice. And I am a level 5 Kunari warrior. So I was an elf in Dragon Age Origins. I was a human, obviously, in Dragon Age 2. So I was a dwarf in Inquisition. So I figured, okay, now I need to round out my character classes. How are you finding the combat?
And I'll take the opportunity here to bring up some gameplay on the screen while we're chatting. I love it. And see, hopefully I've sequenced it. I had it further out to a part that I don't think that you've gotten to yet, so I tried to wind it back. So
no, you're fine. It's but yes, I was like, oh, I've been here. Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully we're getting a little combat here. So at least for the mage, and I don't know like how the other classes play, there's a neat amount of I hate to bring it up and talk to it in reference of the auto targeting. I guess I want to say like combat for me is the right balance between like not bothering you with a bunch of stuff that doesn't actually like add to the gameplay. So it auto locks onto enemies, and you can break that lock and like shift it to a different kind of enemy. It does not like prioritize on like the most powerful enemy like that. It's just like visual acquisition, like where is your line of sight when enemies appear, and it auto locks you on to right the nearest enemy in your line of sight. There is a lock on key. I actually don't have the lock on key mapped because I just haven't found the need to use it. I don't play a ton of Souls games, but when I have played a Souls game, like that lock on key is like absolutely essential to the already minimal amount of time that I actually survive in a Souls game. Here I haven't really found it necessary. And so, like I said, it doesn't, quality of life wise, it just doesn't have a lot of stuff in combat that is to me a bother. Some of the stuff kind of came up to me as like not super intuitive. Like I didn't realize, and maybe I skipped tutorials or didn't pay attention to tutorial. I didn't realize that whenever you take a combat action, that in the bottom tile area of your screen, you do get kind of like a Diablo 4 kind of lower tile menu that has your character abilities and stuff there and like their charging state. And in fact, multiple times while I've been talking about this game, I have made a lot of Diablo 4 references. And it is, an action RPG. I would say much more so than a CRPG, than a Crapic. However, there are a ton of dialogue choices, and you really get a lot of provenance over, with a lot of nuance shaping your relationship with different characters through those conversation choices. And they tend to come in, kind of thick bundles. Like I said, like kind of giving you a lot of options. And you do get a lot of, I don't want to say life choices, but like you do get a lot of choices in your approach. And I'm really curious. It will be interesting, hopefully, if I ever get through this game. The game is supposed to be, I want to say like 55 hours.
I heard around 60. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like mainlining the campaign. That's not like doing side missions and stuff. It can go longer if you do that. But I mean, if I do another playthrough, it'd be super interesting to see what how the story branches based on the choices that you make. But there are some significant ones, like whether or not you take one character's recommendation for the plan forward versus another character's recommendation for the plan forward. How you I'm trying to think where this is in the story. I think it's further than yours, but there are some critical choices about like how you're going to handle certain characters, like when you capture them or when you encounter them, what fate you're going to consign them to. So those things have impact, right, to how the story unfolds. So
and reading about it, and I think it follows that trend of traditional BioWare games, right, where there are some big pivot points, but there are a lot of kind of smaller branches that that divulge out and eventually come back together in some of the big narrative pieces. But it's that kind of divulging out and diverging out is it gives it the kind of gives you your own personal experience. It's where you get your dog really excited and barking in the background, but it is where you get your own story in that.
Yeah, but you specifically asked about the comment. Like I said, I'm really enjoying it. It's it teeters right on the edge of almost giving you a little too much. 4 hours or so into the story, I've got 3 character abilities plus your ultimate. You have a light attack, you have a heavy attack, and the heavy attack really almost acts much more similarly to, at least for a mage, it acts like an ability, and so it consumes mana. It appears in that lower tile area that you see up on the screen now. And so, like I said, I spent some part of the game not fully understanding that.
You find yourself stopping and choosing some of those special attacks, because in the warrior class, I've been doing that quite a bit in terms of situational, that I'll playing on PlayStation, pulling up with a bumper, but you get that kind of radio menu where you're pulling up. For me, it slows that pace of combat down a little bit, even though it really is, like you said, it is an action RPG more than it is anything that Dragon Age has been before. It's much closer to me. It feels much closer in combat to Dragon Age 2 than Inquisition. But even Dragon Age 2, you had kind of area of effects. So as a mage, do you see what your spellcast area effects look like on the field, or is it pretty much as we're seeing in the gameplay, that it's just kind of flinging your bolts at them?
No, I think this was before, and I also have been through probably about midway through my first 4 hours of play. I significantly changed how I had things mapped, and in fact, I think this is the point of the game where I went through and remapped them.
Perfect time. Yep.
What I found was, and so at this point, I have you start off with a staff. I had found like a mage blade, and I briefly made an attempt to play with that thing, and it was just horrible. I was like, no, I am going back to the staff, unquestionably. When I did that, I said, okay, that means I don't really care about where my switch weapon key is mapped. And so it gets super detailed. I'll just say that between a bunch of the ways that I have had controls normally set up with Destiny 2, I had mapped that switch weapon key to the number 1 key in the numeric key row on a keyboard. That's where the player abilities are default mapped. So I wasn't going to have like switch weapon on 1, player ability 2 on 2, player ability 3 on 3, and then then player ability 1 like somewhere else. So when I shifted player ability 1, I just shifted player ability 1, 2, and 3. That just made some things kind of wonky. So this is the point where I'm flipping them back, and I'm putting player ability 1, 2, and 3 back on the 1, 2, and 3 key. So, but with those things remapped, I haven't felt any need to stop combat and hit that key to get that radio menu. In fact, one of the comments I made during the Let's Play as well, that radio menu also is what allows you to dictate what abilities your companion should use. And at one point while in the Let's Play, I said, I mentioned that you can do that, and I don't really want to be bothered, right? Like, I hope my companions can figure out how to play on themselves. So going back to the topic of sometimes combat gets bogged down because they give you a little too much. There is a sequence later on where you're fighting some significant like mini bosses and some minions. And while I'm trying to fight the thing, it's giving me a pop-up tutorial that's telling me, hey, do this combo attack. And I'm like, I don't want to do the combo attack. I don't want to be bothered, but that stinking tutorial won't go away until you do it. But there are, I'm trying to think of a good analogy in a game. It's sort of maybe a little Tekken tag team, a little bit kind of like, but I think there are some other games. But there are certain abilities that are, I forget what they call them.
Is this with the primers and detonators?
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, this is very much yep. And I was going to ask you about that as well. So continue, please.
Yeah, so you can do that. I don't have any that I know of myself. The ones that they presented to me are one where you can have what is the short dwarf's name now? It's dropping. They started calling her by her first name at this point in the story, whereas they Harding. So
yep.
So I have one where, what did you say was the other term? Not detonator, but
primer.
So Harding can throw a primer, and then Nev can do the detonator. And so I mess with that, but I foresee that as being something I'm not gonna bother with a lot. Like I guess it gives you a tactical advantage, but like not a huge one. I would just as soon just utilize my capabilities and then pop my ultimate. I will say as a mage, and again, I don't know if this applies to other classes, but I will say as a mage, what makes sense to me in combat is as your play, like as soon as your player abilities become available, fire them. Like because otherwise you wind up using mana for a lower attack. So like that one that you saw where I was firing like that straight beam, that consumes mana, but it doesn't do as much damage as popping another player ability. That in fact that is the mage's heavy attack for the progression branch that I've gone down. So what actually makes sense is as soon as like player abilities 2 or 3 show up, the best thing for me to do is to pop those and then use whatever remaining mana I want to for the heavy attack. But it doesn't make sense to expend a bunch of mana on heavy attack, and then every time. So for the first half of like this playthrough, every time I went to pop player ability 2 and 3, I didn't have enough mana because I was sitting here firing this mega beam thing. So that was a little bit of kind of figuring out exactly what the game was trying to do. That to me is similar vein to the way I had to figure out how Outriders wanted you to work. Outriders actually like want you to use your special abilities like as often and as frequently as possible,
popping those every time. Yep.
Yeah, versus like a Destiny 2 where you're just incentivized to like hoard your ultimate, right? Because you don't know when you're actually going to need it against the heavy enemy. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, but I'm having a really good time. Like I said, combat can get not the combat, but the amount of abilities you have. I mean, you have a dodge, you have a block, you have 3 player abilities, you have an ultimate, you have your companion's player abilities. For the mage, you have the mana, like charging and constantly managing that as a resource. So it kind of gets to a point where it feels like they're giving you too many options. And they're not done, right? And then you have the igniters and the detonator thing. And like I said, I know that there's more coming, right?
Looking ahead on my skill tree, like there's a lot more there in terms of, and the skill trees I'm finding them engaging. Like I'm already starting to figure out, like, okay, if I know I want to get over to this level 20 mastery skill, what do I need to be able to spec as and move in that direction? Or if I know I want to play a certain style, then looking ahead on the map in terms of what those different skills are that brings you to that style. One of the things I like on the skill tree though is that you can respec without any type of penalty. You can always kind of reset and respec.
That to me is a huge point that needs to be like people need to be stomping their feet about that. At any moment in time, you can go into the skill tree and refund every skill that you've earned up to that point, and just like you said, respec by selecting different skills. There's no, as far as I can tell, there's like a lot of games will do this thing of like if you refund a skill, then there's a penalty. They only give you back like a partial amount, but like they don't do that. And in addition to that, not just the respecting the skills, but as far as I can tell, like everything about the character. So many games, in particular in this last year, maybe 2 years, do this thing where they like gatekeep your ability to change your appearance. And I'm like, they require you to get like a token or some kind of in-game currency, or they only allow you to do it at certain points. And this has some geographic like requirements. As far as I can tell, you can only do it back in like your hub world kind of area. But I'm like, as far as I can tell, and I haven't changed my appearance, but I've hit the points in the UI where it says, hey, you can change your appearance there. and there's no like mess. Like where you like, I don't like why is changing your appearance like a reward? Like you know, I don't need you to bother me with that. So I like that. I think there are other things. And I mean, I would expect and hope that you can't change your backstory. That is a nice thing in the character creation thing here. You do pick like three to six like core components of your backstory, and those things come up right in your dialogue as you're interacting with Solus and as you're interacting with other team members. So it's really nice that you're tailoring elements of who your character is that actually have impact right in the narrative of the game and the dialogue of the game that's unfolding. But I super appreciate the fact that they're just not nagging you with a bunch of mess and crap about like, oh, well, you know, you can't change this about your thing. And I'm like, you know, whatever.
No, I think that it does a lot. It does a lot to player agency and investment in the character to give you that ability to kind of to continue to tweak your character as it goes through the story in whatever way you feel is meaningful within the narrative that you're creating. And I think that that's one of the nice things that BioWare historically has been good at and has struggled in the last decade is actually giving you that kind of sense of agency with the characters that you're playing. And, you know, this is I'm enjoying, I guess I'm only a few hours in, but I am more engaged than a lot than the last time I played the Inquisition. I guess is probably the last time I got really engaged in a BioWare story. Although I played through Andromeda, I appreciated what they were trying to do in Andromeda. Everybody kind of struggled against Anthem in terms of its narrative flow. But even I think it is. Oh, Innate's got some thoughts on this game. Thanks for joining us in the chat, Innate. Yeah, it is. I am stumbling here because I'm watching GameLogic's recording. This is in the Veil Jumper area, and it's probably one of the first puzzles that you actually run into. And it's not a very complicated puzzle. It's actually very simple, but there's no necessarily wayfinding or mapping to tell you what you're trying to figure out. And the key spot for it is in a location that you probably ran past really quickly in the middle of a battle and never knew it was there, because I did exactly what GameLogic is doing, is wandering around everything, trying to figure out how to get over there. And eventually in the process of wandering around, you find the spot for the key that kind of that gives you this piece, right? And so I think one of the things that they're doing here in this game is that it doesn't feel as handholdy as others, right? There's not necessarily, and maybe this is a setting that you can turn on the UI to give you those icons, but in so many other modern games, you would have got a little icon above the spot where you're supposed to move the key to, and just to kind of move you forward. And here you're kind of left exploring and having to figure that out yourself.
I feel, man, that's a topic that I'm torn on.
Okay.
Because like I feel at least what I've seen so far, I feel like for the vast majority of the rest of the gameplay, it's exactly the opposite. Like you go into these missions where they say, oh, find the thing. And there's no cognitive effort required for you to find the thing, right? It completely tells you where the thing is, right? And you get an icon to go. And I mean, and the gameplay is fighting right to get to that thing. It's not really a matter of like finding it and investigating, right? The problem on the section you just saw, and actually the thing that I'm eventually going to figure out is like the first, maybe the second or third question that I asked myself, which was, I wonder if there's a ballista somewhere around here. The key problem with this particular area is they give you a pop-up tutorial that I think winds up misleading you. It tells you that some of these blight nodes are destructible. And so what you wind up doing is, if you pay super attention to that, you wind up spending a lot of your time incentivized to think that, well, I need to find the node that is actually destructible. The one that you saw that I was firing at earlier had this like red
a little
like,
extra glowy piece to
right, exactly. It looked different than the rest of the ones, and so you thought, oh well, that's the thing. But I mean, I saw that wall, and I'm like, oh, that wall looks weak. I wonder if there's a ballista somewhere around there. But I didn't find it initially. And eventually I saw like the glowing globes outside the door, and that clued me into it. And of course, I'd actually I had seen like through the wall,
Yep.
like right away. But yeah, so I don't know. I'll have to definitely get into the game further to see. I have felt that the game is, I wouldn't say handholdy, but I have felt, to me, I've felt that the game has, I would call it a high quality of life, right? And kind of just like I said, like it doesn't weigh you down and nag you with a bunch of stuff that to me doesn't like add to gameplay. In fact, even the way potions work for healing, if you run over a potion, at least for the most part of the game, there's a couple situations where it felt like it wasn't happening, but if you run over a potion and you're already down on life, there's a certain percentage that you're down on life that it will just auto take the potion.
Yep.
You know,
no,
so,
and that's, I mean, there's many guides out there that have talked about just rolling through the potion, or the green barrel, the green jars where the potions are in. Because yeah, you do kind of just automatically sucks it up for you. I think one of the, going back to that puzzle that we were just talking about and the kind of misleading parts, I think one of the reasons that it stood out to me is it was the first time in the first 2 hours of the game that it doesn't hold your hand as directly, right? This is very linear, except for maybe a few spots. And once you get through some of the story pieces, you can go back to these areas, which then open up further and you can explore them a little bit more. But in terms of the narrative piece, it is very linear. This is where it goes back to why I'm feeling a lot of Dragon Age 2 in this, not necessarily in the, we rushed in 18 months to create this, but there's a lot more variety of landscapes than there are in Dragon Age 2, but the straight pathing in terms of the narrative beats feels closer here than it did in kind of the open-endedness of Inquisition. So I think that and from what I've read, like there's an intentionality there of not having it be, and acknowledging that it's not trying to be an open world game like Inquisition really was. It allows for a tighter story if you're trying to follow that, but it also feels more channeled in some ways. I guess this is where, for me, it feels like it's a narrative experience more than it is often a gameplay experience, because it's funneling me through these paths that they look really pretty. The art assets are nice, but it's not necessarily I'm exploring in a way that I'm trying to find where to go next.
It feels like you're playing a movie, in terms of the cinematic presentation, even to, and I love this, even to the point where when you go on to like a level, it gives you like a location title credit.
Oh yeah,
like
you get
thing.
the title card. Yep, of where you are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that feels like, just like an Indiana Jones movie or Game of Thrones, where like they put that on the screen, and I don't mind that. Yes, there's a lot of Sturm and Drang out there in the console community, particularly because of the types of games that are on one platform or another. But I personally like this presentation, and then in terms of kind of the framework of the story presentation, it's very much set piece to set piece, right? You go through some transit areas, but it's really about going from fight to fight, kind of as you see here, and at least for me, I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's what I have come to Dragon Age games in the past for, and also Mass Effect games. Like, is not necessarily the combat, which is, to me, it's satisfying enough and engaging enough in what I'm playing, but it's really about moving from narrative beat to narrative beat, figuring out how the characters interact with each other, how, I think one of the one of the challenges I've had, just kind of concept wise, with Dragon Age, and not even a challenge, I guess. Like, the reason why Dragon Age to me always feels both broader and also not as life threatening as Mass Effect always did is, right. Mass Effect was one kind of singular story building up to everything, and Dragon Age is very much in the D&D. We are a number of different stories that are being told all throughout the world. It's a much broader and more vast dynamic. Innate here in the chat, certain aspects I love, but you guys, I'm too early to speak like you guys about where I think the weak part is going to show up for me heavy, right? In the narrative and the writing. And I think, I think it's been interesting to read reviews around this as well, is that some people are appreciating kind of the cinematic nature of this and the action aspect to it, where some people have been very critical of the writing and the depth in it, or the lack thereof. And in some ways it probably depends on kind of to what level are you looking for. And I think this is, for people, this is not Baldur's Gate 3, right? This is not Dragon Age Origins. To me, this is scoped differently in terms of a narrative. That doesn't mean that it's going to be successful in what it's scoped as, but I'm coming to it with some open expectations, knowing that it is not trying to be as deep and as broad as some of those other games.
So here's kind of where I'm with it. Right? Like, I don't, and then I will admittedly, reveal, as I've said many times on this podcast, I am a fan of the Whedon approach to narratives, and that kind of witty, humorous banter. So that doesn't bother me. Like, that's kind of squarely in my wheelhouse where I am with things. And everything doesn't need to be, from a movie analogy, every game doesn't have to be like an Oscar-winning game, or have Oscar-winning dialogue, or have like super heavyweight, like drippy, dialogue, presentation, narrative. I get and I value those things, but a great comparison so far is Baldur's Gate is an incredible creative accomplishment, and I really like it. But what I find is I get more and more reluctant to go back to that game every time I step away from it. Like, every time, the more times I step away from it, it increases each time I contemplate going back, because of that weight. And because of a lot of the things that I've said tonight, which is that there's a lot of times I just don't want to be bothered. Right. And so, going back to the comment you made about, like, it's not open world, there's some linearity to it. You get to make some choices. But there's a story being presented here for me, and I don't have to do as much hunting and pecking and searching to get that story to kind of reveal itself. And I totally get and I totally understand other people who want that. So, is it kind of sophomoric dialogue? Yes. Am I okay with that? Yes. I don't need a super complex, literary piece, right, to swim through every single time. And I love the action orientation of it, and that to me it's fun, right? And that's a key thing. Like, the fun factor for me is very high right now. Fun factor high, frustration level low, right? That's kind of the two.
I think that's really,
opinions.
I think that's I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you're spot on there in terms of it is a little breezy. It is, but it's intentionally that way, right? It's pulling you through that narrative. It is a light choose your own adventure novel that's giving you some of that interaction. I think Nate's comments in the chat also speak to this a lot as well, in terms of, if this is your first Dragon Age experience, like, this is incredibly approachable. They do a good job of setting this all up. you know, if you haven't played Inquisition from 10 years ago, you're not necessarily, they catch you up enough to be able to, and it's tangential enough that it's not preventing you from enjoying this experience. And there's a lot of lore here if you're going to spend your time digging through the codex and all the other journals that come up, you know. And as somebody who in the last month went back and listened to some of the David Gator Dragon Age novels, like there's a lot of great lore in Dragon Age, but this doesn't slow down the story they're trying to tell in order to give you that lore.
And what I will say is, much like many narratives for many games that have come out recently, there's a ton of, I don't want to say shortcuts, but there are speed lines, right, to weave this plot, right? Like, the notion that you're second in command of this troop of characters who should clearly be significantly leveled beyond where you are, and you're a level 1, Chad coming in here, you're referred to as Rook, and there's a reference in the game that like the most powerful chess piece on the board, and I'm like, yes, but it's also short for rookie. And so you start off as this light level character. You're going in and you're constantly meeting these other characters who have a reputation, right, in the space for the years of battles that they've been through and what they're known for, and they're constantly deferring to you. And I'm like, okay, like I guess I'll just push the I believe button, and move on. And there's like to a compliment I guess I'll have to make is, there's, at least so far what I've been through, there is no reference to you yet as the chosen one, as the reason why they're deferring to you. But then now I realize, after all of the years of complaining that we amongst the gaming community have constantly made about you always being the chosen one, now that you're not the chosen one, I'm like, then why is everybody treating me this way? Which is fine. But yeah, I'm having I'm just having a great time with it right now. And this, I think, again, going back to all these Diablo 4 references I've been making, I think the key thing I would say is, while I have a super great deal of fun with Diablo, it is, Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 were never going to be game of the year, right? When Diablo 2 came along, it made a fight for game of the year, back when we didn't even really commingle PC and console games. And so that discussion was really PC only. And in that space, there was an argument for Diablo 2 to be game of the year. Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 were never going to be that. As fun as Diablo 4 was, and as much as I love constantly going back to Diablo 4, like I said, in fact, with Diablo 4, the more times I step away from that game, I actually, like, my desire when I'm thinking about going back to it is actually increasing, right, over time, versus Baldur's Gate, where I just get now I get this feeling of trepidation and anxiety about the learning curve and the re-onboarding. I actually have a nicer time going back to No Man's Sky, of all things, than Baldur's Gate 3.
That's saying something.
Yeah. And again, that's not a detraction from the greatness that is Baldur's Gate 3. It swept the Game Awards of TGA's, DICE, GDC, Golden Joystick last year. No game has ever done that before. So by no means am I saying anything to take away from Baldur's Gate 3. It just has a weight associated with it. In this, at least right now, doesn't. In fact, I'm playing this game on 2 different PCs right now. No problems switching, back and forth. So it's great. A bit on graphical performance before we go on. I am playing this game. One place I'm playing this game is on a PC with a Ryzen 9 7950X and an RTX 3080 Ti, 64 gigabytes of RAM. On that system, I've got ultra settings, ray tracing turned on. I don't have ray tracing ultra turned on. DLSS in performance mode and reflex and nVidia reflex on. It is running, and now with ray tracing turned on, it is running typically between 70 and 90 frames per second. When I had ray tracing turned off, it was running at 120 to 130 frames per second. So very performant game. I had some problems today when I was recording. This gameplay video was taken where I was recording on the same PC that I was playing on, which is not my normal configuration. There, I was getting like dips below 60. The CPU monitoring that I saw during that time, at least within OBS and on Stream Deck with a plugin I had, showed very high CPU utilization. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate because here where I've got MSI Afterburner running in the upper left-hand corner, CPU temps are mid 60s. And typically when a game is CPU intensive, typically you're going to see IC temperatures above 70 easily. So I think the game is very performant. It may have some CPU limitations on hardware sets where you don't have like a super top end CPU, maybe. But I will also say that, you know, turning ray tracing off, like you're going to be getting, you know, 120 frames per second, most likely. So I'm pretty happy with the graphical performance right now, other than, you know, the couple of edge cases that I run into as a content creator. But other than that, it seems to be okay. I did see some pop in this afternoon too, and I think almost that is some additional optimization that BioWare needs to do, where I think even on high-end systems, there are, you know, minor occasions every rare once in a while where I see in a particular texture map that is highly detailed, like out in the distance, right, that you will see some pop in on your approach path to it, but it's incredibly rare. It's like maybe once in like 2 hours of gameplay.
Nice. Thanks for the tech analysis there as well. This final comment from Nate, and appreciate the comments in the chat, Nate, around Dragon Age Veilguard as well. Yeah, I think as much as I'm enjoying what I'm seeing, it is like any early part of any novel or any piece of fiction is, how does this hold up over time? And hopefully we'll be coming back to this. Maybe at least we'll check in with it a couple other times before we get to our end of the year discussions in December. All right. Well, let's head off into our... It's been a while since we've had just one GX story that we've both been playing. So let's head to our main news over the course of the week. And as we talked about at the top of the hour, much of this is PC and hardware related. So GameLogIQ, why don't you take us through some of these kind of dovetail into each other? So I'll let you keep running, go with the rundown here.
Yeah, so the first one is nVidia is working on ARM processors for Windows, according to a report. This news story over on PC World by Michael Kreider. You might not know it, but nVidia builds a lot of ARM processors. In addition to its self-branded and much-loved Shield set-top boxes, it makes the Tegra heart of every Nintendo Switch, now over 140 million of them as its generation winds down. According to a new report, nVidia wants to develop a Snapdragon competitor for Windows-based hardware as soon as next year. Digitimes Asia reports that nVidia is designing a combined CPU-GPU system-on-chip specifically for consumer PCs, which would compete head-to-head with Qualcomm's Snapdragon X series. So I found this particularly interesting. I mean, not just because of like the stuff I pay attention to in the PC space and with Microsoft and Windows. What I found particularly interesting about this from a gamer perspective is the potential here is for this to jump product lines from laptops over to handheld gaming PCs. And this is a thing that I've been kind of considering and watching with even the Snapdragon processors that are on the new Intel laptops, and kind of wondering if we see those things migrate over to handhelds as well. But NVIDIA coming into the space, to me, makes it even a greater likelihood because, of course, this is where their Shield product line started, right, with a handheld. That Tegra chip that we saw evolve and eventually go into the Nintendo Switch, again, got its start in a handheld gaming system from NVIDIA. So I think, and they talk about this being a combined CPU GPU set. Additionally, right, if NVIDIA starts pushing in that direction and making Qualcomm, right, because more suppliers in a market doing more things leads to often a thing becoming a thing and other competitors getting in the space. We say this all the time with Apple. Now, then when Apple starts doing a thing, then competition like levels up because now everybody says, oh, now this is a real thing to actually pay attention to. So, super interesting to see how this heats up. One of the problems that may drive this is that right now there is an ongoing dispute now between ARM and Qualcomm, driven by Qualcomm. I can't remember the name of the company, but Qualcomm acquired a company, I think a couple of years ago, that had licensed components of ARM's IP to do implementations on its chips. ARM's assertion is that Qualcomm did not obtain that license when it purchased the company. There are various restrictions on that license and who can utilize it. Qualcomm said, no, we bought the company, we can use those licenses. But more so said, and I think maybe because those licenses also had an expiry date associated with them that has been exceeded. Qualcomm also said, no, not really. Actually, the stuff that we're doing wasn't even dependent upon those licenses. So we could have done this even without buying them. Although, of course, the entire reason Qualcomm bought that company was for the specific implementations that utilize that license. So this may come to loggerheads, I would expect, kind of in the same way that, the Samsung Apple thing did. And during brief moments in that trial, Samsung was told, hey, you can't sell phones in this region, you can't sell phones in that region. And there were temporary stays on them selling certain types of handsets from certain product lines during the time, which was just disruptive, right, to their line of business. When you talk about the fact that these chips are in, key parts of, the Windows portfolio that they're trying to move and they're trying to push, that becomes a larger issue. So I think the other thing that's going on in this dynamic is last year, Microsoft announced that it was using Intel to build a custom AI processor, which it would use in its data centers. And it was not going with the NVIDIA GPUs, AI GPUs that everybody is competing for, the H100s or N100s, I think they are. There was, at the time when Microsoft made that announcement, Satya did a very big deal of bringing Jensen out onto the stage and really emphasizing that NVIDIA is a big partner and, they're an important part of their movement forward and blah, blah, blah. But yet at the end of the day, right, there's a huge chunk of money that now Microsoft is not sending in the direction of NVIDIA. So for, since that announcement got made, I've been theorizing that something is going to come up that is going to be an additional component of a Windows Microsoft driven business where there will be a get for NVIDIA as a means of making amends for not utilizing their AI GPUs. I've thought that it would be something in the gaming space, and this could wind up being it. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds.
Nice. So that you hit a couple of those news stories there with that piece. Do you want to anything? We hit the RTX 4070.
Just let me hit the 9800X 3D. Really
okay.
Quick.
Yep. Catch both of those cards first. Yep. Go for it.
So this story over on videocards.com, the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, and this is a problem because the headline is different on different pages. The upcoming 8-core CPU is spotted on Puget Bench. I think that the main headline for the story was that benchmarks for the 9800X 3D are coming out in the content creation space. So you now will start kind of getting a flavor for how the chip is performing in that area. I don't know if they're credited. AMD's soon-to-be released X3D processor has debuted on Puget Bench, a content creator-oriented benchmark suite. The exact source of this test is unclear, but is either an early sample now being tested by motherboard vendors who, until now, only had access to engineering samples, or an early test from the first reviewers. I think the big takeaway from here, and that it gives some specs about what motherboard it was on, memory it was paired with, and it was paired with an RTX 4090 card. I think the big deal is that this chip for this content creation benchmark compared to a Ryzen 7 9700X came in about 6.5% higher than that chip. In the last generation 7800X 3D, that chip probably was maybe the lift here is probably about 8%, 8.5% maybe. And so the key thing is, there is some additional performance here in the content creation space. what I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, and just my own personal paradigm as well, is you know, when I go after various chips in kind of the Ryzen line, I don't know what the heck that just did. So I'm trying to put up banners and now it's showing like two banners. Oh, because I have both banners displayed. So what I would say in this space is, in the way I always buy is, because I'm a content creator and because I do video editing, typically I go for if I'm going to go for an enthusiast level chip, I go for the straight X series chips. And so I've built on a 5950X and a 7950X. If you are primarily looking for gaming performance, that's the only thing you care about, and you want like the chip that is the best gaming, CPU, then you go for the X3D line. And I have a system built on the 7800 X3D. I think what this emphasizes is that you should also be fine if you're a content creator and you want to go with one of these chips too. It's not like you're going to be totally left behind. But it starts to give you a flavor for, right, if you're looking for a certain percentage lift from your next upgrade. I would also say if you're on a 7800, 7900X, 7000 series GPU or CPU, there's no need for you to upgrade to a 9000 series CPU. So there's a lot in the hardware review community that talks about, the comparative like performance lift between like 7000 and 9000 series. And I'm like, I don't know that any of those people should be upgrading. So I don't really know why there's so much uber focus on that. The people who should be upgrading to 9000 series chips, I think, would be people on 5000 series Ryzen CPUs or earlier. And Nate, I see your comment in that. Unless I said something where I dropped the 3D, I'm not sure what your 3D comment means. The benchmark that I was talking about was how the Puget bench for the 9800 X3D compares to the 9700X. Okay, yeah, I was agreeing with you. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I hadn't screwed something up, so I won't have to come back and do another correction
round
feedback
of
next week.
Corrections. Okay.
Yes.
Sounds good. Then we've got the RTX 4070 Ti Super.
Yeah, so I thought this was interesting. I think one thing that I've become more aware of over the last few weeks is, so when GPUs roll out, by and large, like you typically don't have to do a ton of mincing of the meat, right? A ton of like, super observation about like what specific like version of the GPU chip is going on the AIB, right? The integrated board from a third party manufacturer. There have been a couple of occasions over the last few weeks where a SKU of a card has come out that is differentiated at a super atomic level, where that may not be the card for you to buy, like if you didn't like pay attention to it. And so I want to say it was MSI who recently released like a round of, I want to say 4070 series cards. I can't remember, TI or Super, where there's a slight difference between like the exact version of the Ada chip that actually makes it like less performant than the other one, and they're selling for like $50 less. So if you don't really pay attention to it, then you could wind up buying a card. Like, so there's stuff like that out here. This, however, is actually moving the needle in the opposite direction. So this new story over on video cards, again, Zotac has more RTX 4070 Ti Super with NVIDIA's most powerful GPU. The 8102 enters more cards. AD. We provided extensive coverage on the launch of a subvariant of the 4070 Ti Super. To our knowledge, these cards are essentially RTX 4090 models featuring a lower-end 8102-175 GPU SKU and fewer GDDR6X modules. However, the cooling solutions are identical on both models. And so this is some weird kind of variant or branch that incorporates some of the design of the 4090 combined with a chip that is obviously closer in performance to just the baseline stock 4070 Ti. The advantage that this gives you is that it's got a significantly larger cooler, and so you get additional overhead, which may help people who are trying to overclock, or you just get cooler GPU temperatures, which may serve you instead better for games that come along that really stress your GPU. I think there are fewer in terms of specs. Both cards are equipped with 8102-175 GPU configured to enable 8448 CUDA cores and equipped with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory across a 256-bit memory bus. Also lower TDP, I think, which is another big thing. TDP is capped at 285 watts in comparison to, I forget what the TDI was for the base, but that TDP is higher. Power connectors are slightly different. So at the end of the day, you get an overall just better power profile and greater efficiency, which again may allow you to do some additional overclocking or just get less of a hotbox effect right in your PC, in your overall PC enclosure, which may just help you keep temps across the whole box.
So at the end of the article, it says that both of these cards are exclusively announced for the Chinese market at this time. So is that any thoughts on why it's exclusive? Is it part of the power draw differences? Is there some, or is this something that you feel it will be likely rolled out elsewhere? Or is this a regional differentiation based on demand?
I think the key thing out here is just to make people aware of it, and from here, I'm sorry, I'm not going to hold everybody's hand, but individual users keep an eye and see if these cards migrate. I have my RTX 4080, and it took a big gulp and a huge leap of faith. Is actually by an Indian manufacturer. And it is not super common like in Western parts of the world, but they do periodically become available in batches through Amazon. And so I went with that card, and I've had a great time with that card. It was probably $200 less than the RTX 4080s that were on sale from like Asus and a lot of the common manufacturers. So I don't know that it's gonna jump or leap, but it's also Zotac. So there's a good chance that it just might. So again, information's out there just for people to keep an eye on, but also to see if any other manufacturers kind of do the same thing. I think the key thing is also, and again, I'm just learning this stuff and becoming aware of it as well, is if you are really in the weeds, right, for these parts and wanting to get like the Uber deal out of everything that you buy, which again, I'm not always in this mode. But it's clear that at this point, it would be really in these waning months of the generation, right, to keep an eye out and read a little deeper than normal for some of these very minor nuances, because as this generation draws down, right, there's a good chance that there will be a few variants that are out there, and definitely while prices are dropping, don't just go out and buy a card that's like $50 less from a mainstream brand manufacturer, because if it's like, again, in the case of an MSI, is it $50 off because they're just trying to draw down stock right before the 5000 series cards come out, or is it $50 off because they've made some wackadoodle change that allows them to sell it cheaper, but it's actually not as performant as another card.
All right, so before we get to our final news story here, I want to do a correction on myself, just as you've been self-policing your last week's show. So at the top of this week's show, I said there were not many big stories around layoffs or other things that we've covered in the past. I will admit that I completely glossed over Firewalk in terms of Sony shutting down Firewalk Studio. This is the Concord developer that was officially closed and shuttered by Sony this past week. That we covered Concord's closure after 10, 14 days on the market, less than that. and quite a bit of time when it happened back in early September. And now, at that time, it was announced that they were taking it offline to retool, and have not heard anything else past that. Lots of conversation and speculation around what that might, if how much of that would even be possible. And now I think we get the answer to that in terms of Sony shutting down Firewalk Studio and kind of ending the project that was Concord. So I wanted to give myself a correction from our announcement at the top of the show before we finish out our news stories.
So one question on that, DBQ, before we go to the last news story. I haven't tracked it as closely. Was anything said in the statement? So in the case of, can't remember what studio it was that also just recently closed down. Gosh. Oh, the Prince of Persia development studio.
Yes.
In that case, those employees were just redistributed to other Ubisoft studios, right? They weren't laid off, although it wouldn't surprise me if like one or two of them were let go. Anything like that said for Concord?
I am not seeing anything in the. I'm looking at Game Developer. It was initially Bloomberg was the initial spot where it came out. That Sony Interactive, the Firewalk Studios. We got an email from Herman Holst from Sony Interactive CEO, and let's see if it talks about if they're moving again, whether or not they absorb some of them, like we've seen with Bungie, where they've spun off some of those teams and absorbed them into other development. But here, it does not specifically say. So there is no explicit that we are moving people around, right? Which that means probably like, yes, probably some people have been moved, but not necessarily a big piece. So this is, both Neokoi and Firewalk Studios. So there were two studios that were closed within Sony.
All right. You ready for us to move on to the last news story?
Let's take that last news story.
Okay, this news story over on Tech Power Up. Apple and Samsung in the fray to acquire Intel, and this is a rumor. This story by, I guess they don't use full authors' names on their site. So, like I said, over on Tech Power Up by username BTA Runner. Apple and Samsung are reportedly in the fray to acquire Intel, according to a spectacular rumor cited by Moore's Law is Dead. This would put the list of companies looking to acquire Intel at 3, Apple, Samsung, and Qualcomm. I want to say, I thought ARM was also mentioned as being in the running for Intel, but maybe I'm wrong. All 3 are ARM licensees with unique characteristics. Apple currently has an ARM-based SoC hardware division that makes custom chips for all its devices, including Macs. Samsung would go on to be an overseas parent company for an American heritage company like Intel. But something like this is not unheard of when you consider examples such as Boston Dynamics being acquired by Hyundai or Westinghouse Nuclear's acquisition by Japan's Toshiba before changing hands to Canadian Brookfield Partners. Then there's Qualcomm. The American company is having a bit of a falling out with ARM, and the prospect of owning the x86 IP should be tempting. So, look, Qualcomm is going after or made an offer for Intel because in that case, I think diversifying their play on the chip market makes sense. Including as being an adjacency to what they're already doing with Windows, as providing, being right now today, the provider for ARM CPUs for Windows on ARM. I have a hard time believing that Apple, with all of the problems they had with Intel, would be interested in acquiring Intel. I don't think that there was enough blood hatred between the two of them before it was all over for them to be wanting to buy Intel out of spite. I also don't know. I mean, Apple is the quintessential company that although I think they're doing a worse job about it now than they were in the Jobs era, but they are the quintessential company that is really oriented around not getting their feet into things that are not Apple. And being a chip manufacturer is not Apple. Whoever takes over Intel, by the way, and I think most of these people are talking about taking over the Intel core compute division, not talking about taking over their foundries. I think they're already in the process of spinning their foundries off. I don't believe that you're going to get out of providing chips to everyone else. Like, I don't think that Apple was going to be allowed to take over Intel and then convert that into only making chips for Apple. First of all, the raw manufacturing capability, right, and the design capability of that, I think exceeds what Apple needs. And like I said, there are things like government contracts and other things that are associated with Intel. There's the server side of that core compute. Like, it's just a mismatch. Samsung has a division that is solely focused on fabricating chips, and so that I think makes. I mean, they are an equivalent of Qualcomm, and I think there's things that make more sense for them there. So I don't buy into the Apple rumor. Of course, the impact of this is, the reason why I included it in the rundown is because there would be a knock-on effect. I mean, if somebody does acquire Intel, there will be a knock-on effect to what happens with gaming, for quite frankly, whatever reason. And that reason is a reason that I don't understand. Some of you gamers continue to build gaming boxes on Intel, although I think for several generations it has only made sense to me to build on AMD. But that's just me. But there are Intel chips being used in handheld PCs handheld gaming PCs as well. And so, if somebody does acquire Intel, it is going to be disruptive. It could be disruptive in a way that benefits gamers. You might find more Intel chips going into spaces where AMD is kind of ruling the roost right now, because AMD has all of the consoles with the exception of the Nintendo Switch and Switch 2, which, as far as we believe, nVidia will be the chip in the Switch 2. And then, what was I going to say? They have all the consoles. I guess I was thinking they have all the consoles and they have all the handheld PCs. Not all the handheld PCs. There's a couple that, but I mean, they are the core of handheld PCs. And so, you like I said, you could see Intel being taken off the board as far as being the core provider for some gaming products, like gaming laptops are almost exclusively Intel. And then, or you could see them, become more prevalent. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. DBQ, any comments or questions on that one?
No, at this point, as a rumor, it'll be. I think you're right in terms of the potential disruption, both positive and negative. But I, like many rumors, I want to wait until there's some more actual details behind something. All right, well, that takes us through our news. Thank you, GameLogIQ, for running through a lot of the hardware-specific pieces. I appreciate your expertise when it comes to that. So we are in our final segment here on Enough to Keep Going. This is where we round out anything else we've been playing for the week. GameLogIQ, it looks like both you and I have spent most of our time in Dragon Age and maybe a few other things. I have Dragon Age has been my big game for the week, even though it came out toward the end of the week. I have also played a couple of smaller stuff. I am one of the multiple millions that have downloaded and played the Pokemon trading card game on mobile. It is news stories at the end of the week show it generating 1.9 million in its first 24 hours, making it one of the top 5 successes in terms of mobile revenue at an initial launch, which as a Pokemon game isn't all that surprising. The other game that I've been playing also came out on Thursday, and that is the Castlevania DLC for Vampire Survivor. So Vampire Survivor, it's on everything. I picked this up on Steam, playing it on my Steam Deck. I've had Vampire Survivor on Steam before, but the Castlevania DLC comes in at $3.99, $3.50 $360 with its 10% discount. For the price of a cup of coffee, I can get some Castlevania Vampire Survivor. It's got, it has way more characters in it than I will probably ever see, if I'm being honest, given my history with Vampire Survivor, that I enjoy jumping in and out, but do not spend the time to necessarily grind it to unlock everything. But I'm enjoying what I'm playing. It's got a lot of different characters. You get, you have your whip-based characters, your spell-based characters. It pulls from across all the different Castlevanias over time. You get the classic Belmonts, you get the Alucard, you get the Bloodlines people from Genesis Mega Drive, you get the DS and all the kind of side offshoots there. I don't know. I haven't dug deep enough. If you get the 360 PS3 generation kind of reboot Lords of Shadow characters in it as well, but it's a little bit of everybody, and it has remixed Castlevania music, which to me is actually a great way to spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes kind of moving around trying not to die in Vampire Survivor. Yeah, Nate, it's got for $4. If you're a fan of Castlevania, it's a great way to kind of interact with all the different characters and the music throughout the franchise history and play it there. So it's not drastically different than Vampire Survivors. It is a single big map that kind of moves you through different points, which is not as, it's not as varied as some of the other maps within Vampire Survivor. It also, unlike the first kind of non-franchise themed Vampire Survivor DLCs, it doesn't have an adventure mode that is any different. It is pretty much just a one big map that takes you through the castle. Not that I've gone all the way through, but it's a significant, again, it feels like way more than $4 worth of content. But then again, Vampire Survivors is way more than $5 worth of gameplay. So I've enjoyed what I'm playing. It was an easy pickup, and it's one of those where for as streamlined and as easy as Dragon Age Veilguard is to engage with and stay connected to, as GameLogIQ was saying, sometimes I just don't have that block of time to commit, and Vampire Survivor is a nice little snippet. Have it both on my phone and on Steam Deck as well. GameLogIQ, anything else that made it through your list of games for the week that you want to highlight here?
Nope, that's all I've had time for. I was on business travel Monday through Wednesday, and I got back and I got the Zeitgeist itch while I was on travel. So I was like, I need to play me something new when I get back.
I completely caught on found myself getting hooked on the hype train as well for Dragon Age, which is great. I'm enjoying it. It's been fun to kind of talk about it tonight. I've played a few other things over the course of the week, but nothing that I haven't talked about previously, as I'm making my way through multiple seasons in an online franchise for college football and going through recruiting and multiple years and development there. So, which is showing some cracks in terms of some of the depth in it, but still enjoying it.
So one question I want to ask, I heard the revenue number that you quoted for Vampire Survivors. Destiny has a mobile variant?
Wait, that was for the 1.9 million in 24 hours was for Pokemon.
Okay. Gotcha. And that was user numbers, not revenue. Or was it revenue?
It was revenue. The user numbers are much higher than that, but it's the 1.9 million revenue on launch day. Yep.
Okay. So I apologize. I heard the revenue number that you quoted for Pokemon, not for Vampire Survivors. My question remains the same. Destiny has a mobile variant coming out? if
Yes,
I
that
remember
was
correctly.
announced a couple weeks ago. I don't think we talked about it here. It's pretty much led by NetEase. Some coordination with Bungie. This was announced that Bungie had done a partnership with NetEase a couple years ago. At this point, um, there the signups for it were were out when they announced it 2 weeks ago. I think that you have the potential of getting into kind of early access, a closed beta around it. Looking at it, it's definitely more. It's looks like it's running on higher end phones. That it's the limited. I shouldn't say the limited, but it is looks like it's using more within the last 2 years in terms of hardware of the phone models that it's looking for as you sign up for to get a inclusion into the beta. So it's not out fully yet, so we don't know what kind of downloads look like, what revenue looks like. To answer your question or your implied piece of downloads versus revenue for Pokemon, the trading card game, it hit 10 million downloads within its first 48 hours.
So my question really was: so you played Diablo Immortal?
Yes,
We've now got Destiny coming
which is
out,
another NetEase game.
right?
Yep.
I mean, this thing obviously isn't going to probably move Pokemon numbers, but I guess my question is, the mobile space is so atomized, and there's been a lot of discussion this year over, the rise of mobile and AAA, like mobile becoming a place for AAA games. We've seen data that comes back over like those Ubisoft games and Capcom games that have gone to mobile that didn't move the needle at all. In fact, it's quite clear that they actually cost those companies more, theoretically would have cost those companies more money to put those games on mobile than they recouped. Of course, what we don't know is we don't know how much they were paid to put them on mobile. We think, there were some incentives there.
Right. Assassin's Creed Mirage and Resident Evil 4 on Apple.
So I guess my question is while mobile has a huge potential and obviously has the numbers, what I don't think exists in mobile is it's incredibly difficult to be like the game on mobile, right? And that is up for grabs. Like anyone, like you having a proven footprint in the gaming industry doesn't increase your chances of being like the big revenue owner, right, of any given like month or business cycle. And it seems like there's an incredibly small number that are able to wear that crown in any singular space and time, like to the tune of like 3 games. I mean, what is your feeling about the potential of Destiny coming out on mobile, and just this notion of, if it's so hard for any one game to burble to the top, like what is the viability of people putting AAA games on mobile?
That's a much bigger question that I don't know that I don't know that I am researched enough to give a good answer to that in terms of AAA on mobile. I think my knee jerk reaction there is while we are coming closer to the spot and are at the spot where technology wise we have the potential to do that, as shown by by Assassin's Creed Mirage and Resident Evil 4 and a variety of other things, whether that is the use case for that and that is what people are looking for in those spaces. I think by the nature of what we've seen in the adoption and purchase of that is not necessarily the same. I think for the people that are looking for full on AAA games on mobile, I think we are probably in a better spot to say that that is served by cloud gaming, whether that's through nVidia, GeForce Now, or through Game Pass. I also think that where the real revenue, the honest answer of why I don't think that AAA games ever really take over mobile space is that the revenue of a AAA game is never going to be the same as a monetized game that is going after whales and is catching people, and is Skinner box designed in such a way that that's not what a AAA game is. Even at the peak of loot boxes, we were not in the console space in the same area as we are now in the mobile space of why it is difficult for games to break through in that mobile space, because it is so saturated, and then to break through and have people hold on to them is even harder. And so I think that's a challenge. And Nate hits it here in his last comment, not designed for it, looking for, mobile gaming is designed to be something different than a AAA. I'm going to be interested to see what the Destiny game ends up being. I think I would say that from a market share perspective, this is probably 3 years too late on the Destiny front to really capitalize on kind of the mindset and the kind of hype train around Destiny as itself. But it's got a built-in install, and maybe this is the place where people that, as Destiny tries to figure out what it's going to be next, like, there is probably a space here, but it is not going to be it's serving a different market than what the AAA Destiny ends up and doing.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, like you're saying, like, I don't think the mobile Destiny 2 is going to find like an install, like a ready to be made.
Remember, this is not Destiny 2. This is a mobile Destiny. It's its own. It's a tiered, not a tiered, but it's a branch of the timeline. It's a whole separate story mode. Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah, no,
my Destiny lore hat on, and I had to correct you there for a minute.
No, that's I'm agreeing with you. What I'm saying is, I don't think they're gonna find. It's not like PC and console Destiny 2 players are gonna readily jump into this thing, and therefore, like, there's an immediately addressable market of, like, millions of Destiny 2 players, right, who are gonna concurrently play on mobile. It is interesting. What I'm interested to see is if they land with kind of the Fortnite on mobile crowd, the Call of Duty on mobile crowd, and you get a new generation of people who just see it as an alternative to Fortnite and Call of Duty on mobile. And then if they do start playing on mobile, then when Destiny 3 comes out or whatever they're going to do, right, with the Destiny product line, if that becomes, I could see that becoming a ready install base, right, of people who migrate over and play concurrently on big boy hardware. But yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll see how it goes.
I'm sure I will try to play it once it comes out, and I will balk at throwing too much money at it, just like I did with Diablo Immortal. So, all right. Any final wrap up for the week, GameLogIQ?
Yep, just going to continue playing Dragon Age: Veilguard.
Me too. I'm looking forward to keeping my way through it. And Nate, thanks for joining us here in the chat and the discussion about Dragon Age. I'm glad that someone in the chat had the ability to, has also been playing it and am able to engage with us as well. If you are listening to this or viewing it after the fact, we are always glad to have you engage with us, whether it's coming in on a Sunday, 8:00 Eastern in America, whether it is hitting and listening online at another point in time, streaming through wherever you are finding us. We are glad to have you. Look forward to having you engage with us and give us some feedback. Give us those corrections where we have screwed up and misspoken, put our foot in our mouth as we tend to do. But we are always glad to be here. GameLogIQ, thank you for the good discussion. I'm glad we could bring some dialogue about Thetis. There we go. I'll get there eventually. Around Dragon Age, and glad to. We will be back again talking about Dragon Age, talking about a variety of things next week. Next week, all three of us will be here as we head into the middle of November. Not too many more big releases coming up. for the year. We get a couple. I know we got Mario and Luigi Brothership that Tao was talking about a couple weeks ago. That's coming up here mid-November. A couple other releases, but I'm already starting to think about my gaming superlatives. So picked up a few other games that I thought I'd talk about here this week, but Dragon Age really ate up that. So I've got my superlative backlog is starting to build up here a little bit to clear off, but we'll get there.
So a couple other notes on releases next week. You also have Metal Slug Tactics coming out on PS5, PS4, Xbox Series XX, Xbox One, Switch, and PC in 2 days, actually Election Day. Planet Coaster 2 comes out, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC the day after on November 6th, I think. And as you mentioned, Mario and Luigi Brothership out on November 7th. Metro for VR fans, Metro Awakening VR, which has been getting, I think, positive buzz. Is out on PSVR 2, Quest, and PC VR on November 7th.
All right. So we look forward to you joining us next week. We're back here for episode 363 for the Enough to Keep Going podcast. I am your host, DBQ Hams. GameLogIQ, again, thank you for running the boards and keeping us honest. So until next week, play the games you love. Love those you play with. And be kind to yourself. Good night, everybody. And for those of you still viewing us, we are glad to have you here for the first after party of the Enough to Keep Going podcast.
Okay, we are out of here. I switched some things around in the way that I'm doing because I'm podcasting from my Mac now. So I have the outro though now. So we will see you guys later.